Ethan laughed as he slammed the car door, his voice slicing through the warm Italian evening air. The taillights of our rental car faded into the distance, disappearing around the bend of a cobblestone street, leaving behind nothing but a cloud of dust and the echo of his friend's laughter. I stood there frozen, still mid-sentence from our argument outside the tiny cafe. Locals at nearby tables paused mid-bite, their eyes following the spectacle. I whispered to myself, "He'll come back. He's just trying to scare me." But as the minutes stretched into an hour, and the golden sky darkened into twilight, dread sank into my stomach like a stone. I couldn't even pronounce the name of the town I was stranded in. Just hours earlier, I had asked Ethan to slow down on the wine at lunch. His college buddies, rowdy and drunk during their annual reunion, had egged him on. "She's always controlling you, man," one of them had jeered as he ordered another bottle. When I suggested we head back to the hotel, Ethan followed me outside. His words slurred, but his anger was disturbingly sharp. "Your purse has your passport, right?" he sneered. "You'll figure it out. You're so smart. Always telling me what to do." Then he drove away. I checked my wallet. €80, barely $37. Not enough for a train, let alone a flight home. My credit cards? In Ethan's wallet. He'd offered to carry them earlier when my purse was full. My hands trembled as I searched for options. I found a small pension above a bakery, dingy with a tiny bed and a sink in the corner, but it was all I could afford. The elderly woman who handed me the keys spoke no English, but she placed her hand gently on mine, as if she could feel the weight of what had just happened. Back in the room I called Ethan. 27 times. Straight to voicemail. I texted. I called his friends. All blocked. One by one. The realization hit me in waves. This wasn't an impulsive reaction. This was planned. Calculated. Humiliation packaged as a joke. That night I didn't sleep. I stared at my phone hoping for a reply, praying he'd return the next morning with an apology, some excuse, anything. I would be furious, of course, but maybe we could move past it. Go back to Boston. Back to the life we'd built. He was a respected architect. I was the loyal wife who had given up her career in interior design to manage his social calendar, his life. But morning came, and Ethan didn't. On the second day, I rationed the last of my money, just enough for a panini. I wandered the town, searching hotels and cafes, hoping to spot someone from our tour group. By evening, I realized the group had moved on. They'd left me behind like forgotten luggage. On the third day, a kind cafe owner noticed me lingering near his doorway. He offered me espresso and, through broken English, directions to the nearest police station. The officer there listened politely but seemed unsurprised, like I was just one more tourist left behind by someone who never really cared. I walked back through the narrow streets, clutching a copy of a report that wouldn't get me home. My body was tired, but my spirit was unraveling. Somewhere between that cobbled police station and the cracked walls of my tiny room, something shifted. The shame I felt started to dissolve, and in its place a spark lit. A question I hadn't dared ask before. What if this wasn't the end? What if this was my beginning? By the time I reached the police station, it was clear I was just another story in a long list of abandoned tourists. The officer was kind, but his limited English and my non-existent Italian left me with little more than a filed report and a sympathetic smile. That afternoon I made the most difficult decision of my life. I stood before a pawn shop window, staring at the diamond ring Ethan had upgraded for me on our 5th anniversary. 2 carats of false promises replacing the modest little band we'd started with. With trembling fingers I twisted it off. The shopkeeper offered far less than it was worth, but it was enough to fund the next step of my journey, wherever that might lead. "America?" he asked. "Call family." But I couldn't face the phone calls. Calling my mother meant hearing "I told you so" about Ethan's temper. Calling friends meant confessing how hard I'd worked to make a broken marriage look perfect. So instead of reaching for home, I reached for escape. The bus station was nearly empty, the electronic board flickering with names of cities I'd only ever read about in glossy travel magazines. My finger hovered over my father's name in my contacts. One call and he'd wire money. One call and I'd be back in Boston, in the home Ethan and I had built, where I'd slowly made myself smaller so he could take up more space. I remembered how he used to laugh and hide my design portfolios when I talked about going back to work. "Why complicate things?" he'd say. "We don't need the money. I need you focused on our life." And I'd laugh too back then. But sitting in that grimy little station, it hit me. Those weren't jokes. They were bars on the cage I hadn't realized I'd been living in. "Where you go?" the ticket agent asked gently. I didn't hesitate. "Greece," I said. "As far as you can get me." 14 hours and 3 transfers later, I stumbled off the last bus. My body ached from the bumpy ride and hard seats, and the scent of salt air and olive trees greeted me like a whisper from another life. I had no idea where I was. The name of the village was unpronounceable, but I didn't care. My phone had died somewhere between countries, my stomach was empty, and I felt like a ghost. I wandered into the village square, past whitewashed buildings and quiet cafes. I had just enough euros for maybe 2 nights in the cheapest room I could find. No plan. No friends. No language beyond please and thank you. And yet, something stirred inside me. A strange calm. A flicker of something that felt dangerously close to freedom. Ethan had meant to punish me for questioning him, for challenging him. Instead, he'd accidentally set me free. The sun burned overhead as I walked away from the town, sandals blistering my feet, water bottle long empty. Olive trees shimmered like silver coins in the breeze, just before my knees gave way. The ground rushed up to meet me, but I barely felt the impact. My last thought before darkness closed in. How fitting to collapse alone in yet another foreign country. But this time I wasn't afraid. Then her voice. Gentle, urgent, unfamiliar. A pair of weathered hands turned me over. I blinked up at an elderly woman with warm, kind eyes and lines that told a lifetime of stories. She was speaking rapid Greek, patting my cheeks, offering a canteen. The cool water hit my throat like life itself. She pointed to herself. "Elena," she said, smiling softly. I mimicked her gesture, murmuring, "Rachel." She helped me to my feet, surprisingly strong for someone so small, and guided me toward a stone farmhouse nestled among the olive trees. I didn't know it yet, but Elena wasn't just saving me from the roadside. She was about to help me rebuild the parts of myself I'd given away piece by piece over the last decade. In the most unexpected corner of the world, I was about to start over. Not as Ethan's wife, not as someone's second thought, but as the woman I'd always been underneath. The ring was gone. The marriage was over. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was finally stepping into my own life. "Rachel," I whispered, mimicking the woman as she pointed to herself and said, "Maria." Her small frame was deceptively strong as she helped me to my feet, gently guiding me up a dusty path toward a stone farmhouse nestled between silvery olive trees. I didn't have the strength to protest, nor did I want to. Every cell in my body was screaming for rest. The scent of thyme and oregano drifted on the breeze, blending with something savory bubbling inside. When we reached the house, Maria settled me at a worn wooden table in the kitchen, where herbs hung from the beams like old blessings. She disappeared down the hall and returned with a glass of cool water and a bowl of warm soup. My stomach growled embarrassingly loud. Maria just smiled, her weathered face soft with understanding. A few minutes later, a man appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a cloth, sun-darkened skin, a silver mustache, cautious eyes. "Theo," Maria said, nodding toward him. "Her husband." He greeted me with quiet suspicion but no hostility. That night passed in a blur of broken sentences and hand gestures, punctuated by tears. I tried to explain what had happened, being left behind, abandoned in a foreign country by the man I once called my husband. Maria listened, nodding as though she understood every word, even when she couldn't. Theo remained mostly silent but observant, occasionally saying something Maria translated through gestures and gentle smiles. Before I knew it, they were offering me their spare room. A small whitewashed space with a narrow bed, a handmade quilt, and the first real safety I'd felt in days. I collapsed into it like it had been waiting just for me. The next morning, I woke to the sound of roosters crowing and the smell of fresh bread baking. At the foot of the bed was a folded cotton dress, old, soft but clean, and a cardigan that looked like it hadn't been worn in years. I slipped them on, the fabric hanging loosely on my thinner frame, but they felt like armor. When I entered the kitchen, Maria beamed at the sight of me, instantly pouring strong coffee and setting down a plate of bread with olive oil and honey. The flavors were simple but perfect. I opened my phone, now charged thanks to an adapter Theo had found, and began trying to explain that I couldn't stay. I needed to return to the village, figure out my next move. But Maria's expression crumpled. She pointed to the rain outside, then to my still blistered feet. Stay, she said. One of the few English words she knew. Rest. For the next 3 days I tried to leave. Each time Maria gently stopped me. Once I had my shoes on and my bag in hand. Her eyes filled with such visible sadness that I paused. She took my hand and led me to the mantel. There she opened a wooden box filled with old photographs. Her fingers trembled as she pointed to a young woman with her eyes and Theo's smile. Sophia, she said softly. Then she gestured far away. Australia. She mimed holding a baby, then pointed to a recent photo of an infant. Grandbaby. No, see. I understood. I wasn't being manipulated. I was filling a hole that loss had carved into her heart. Somehow that made me want to stay even more. I slowly began integrating into their quiet rhythm of life. Maria taught me how to gather eggs from their chickens without scaring them. How to hang wet laundry so the mountain breeze would dry it just right. Theo guided me through the garden, showing me how to tell the weeds from the herbs. The first time I accidentally pulled up something valuable. He didn't scold, just chuckled and started again. It was work, real physical work. Nothing like the curated workouts in pristine gyms back in Boston. My body protested at first. The blisters deepened. My arms ached. But slowly new calluses formed. Muscles I'd long ignored woke up and held me upright. Each evening I sat on their front step, watching the sun melt into the horizon. The ache in my body reminding me that I'd earned this peace. What surprised me most wasn't just how quickly I adjusted to this life, but how much I craved it. The order. The simplicity. The honesty. In Boston, I had mastered the art of appearances. Now I was learning the beauty of authenticity. Maria and Theo hadn't asked for anything in return. Yet in their generosity they gave me the space to become someone I didn't know I'd lost. A woman with grit, with grace, and a growing fire inside her. I had come to grease a ghost of myself. But with each sunrise and every bowl of soup passed across that wooden table, I was slowly becoming whole again. With each passing day, the blisters on my hands hurt a little less, and my strength slowly returned, not just in body but in spirit. The mental loop of abandonment that had played on repeat in my mind began to quiet, replaced by simpler rhythms. Farm chores, learning basic Greek, the feel of soil under my fingernails. In the evenings, I would sit on the porch beside Maria as she knitted and Theo smoked his pipe. There, in the company of olive trees older than my country, I experienced something I hadn't known in years: peace. The betrayal still pulsed deep within me, but it no longer defined me. This wasn't the end of my story. It was somehow a beginning I never expected. 2 weeks after my arrival, Maria and I sat side by side shelling peas from the garden. She studied me for a long moment before asking, gently and in her slowly improving English, "Home? You won't go home." She made a simple hand gesture toward the horizon, then pointed to America. The word hit me like a wave. Home. It conjured images of our polished Boston brownstone, the designer furniture, the picture-perfect life I had carefully curated, but also Ethan's quiet control, the way he'd managed all our money under the guise of efficiency, the subtle but relentless way he'd chipped away at my friendships, how he dismissed my career aspirations as hobbies. Tears slipped down my cheeks as the words tumbled out. Not in complete sentences, not in perfect grammar, but in raw, honest emotion. Maria might not have understood every word, but she understood the pain. I told her about the marriage I'd tried so hard to keep intact, about the shame of being abandoned like a forgotten suitcase in a foreign country. She didn't interrupt. When I finished, Maria placed her weathered hand over mine, then pointed to her heart, the land surrounding us, and finally to me. Her meaning was clear. I had a place here if I wanted it. I took a deep breath. Work, I said, mimicking Theo's motions from the grove. I stay. I work. Maria's face lit up like dawn over the Aegean. She nodded, then returned to shelling peas as if we'd just agreed on what to cook for dinner. When really I'd just rewritten the next chapter of my life. The very next morning, long before the sun rose, Maria gently shook me awake and handed me work clothes and a pair of sturdy boots that had once belonged to her daughter Sophia. Bleary-eyed but resolute, I followed her and Theo down to the grove, where moonlight still clung to the trees. "Elise," Maria said softly, pointing to the fruit-heavy branches. She demonstrated how to gently comb the limbs with a wooden rake, so the olives would fall onto nets below. My first attempt was clumsy. I sent twigs and leaves raining down but hardly any olives. Theo didn't scold, only offered a patient correction. By mid-morning, the Mediterranean sun blazed above us, and my shoulders burned. My palms were raw with blisters. Maria looked them over and chuckled. "Boston lady hands," she teased, before disappearing into the house and returning with a tin of home-made salve that smelled like rosemary and beeswax. The cooling balm stung at first, but it worked. "Tomorrow better," she promised, and she was right. Every day I got stronger. My technique improved. My eyes learned the subtle difference between a ripe olive and one that needed more time. Within weeks, I could work alongside them without slowing them down, taking quiet pride in the growing mounds of harvested fruit. But harvesting was only half the work. The sorting process, done under the shade of a pergola, was painstaking. We examined each olive for bruises, for imperfections. Perfect ones were bottled for premium oil, slightly blemished for second grade. The damaged ones were set aside for soap. Maria watched over me like a hawk at first, gently correcting me with a tap here, a nod there. But over time she said less. I could see her confidence in me growing. One evening Theo looked over and smiled. "You learn fast," he said in his careful English. My heart warmed at the compliment. It wasn't just that I was learning how to farm. I was learning how to belong. Theo's simple compliment warmed me more than anything I'd felt in months. My learning didn't stop in the groves. It extended into Maria's kitchen, a space that at first intimidated me with its lack of modern appliances or polished countertops. Back in Boston, I considered myself a decent cook, someone who could follow recipes from glossy magazines and prepare meals that impressed Ethan's colleagues. But Maria's kitchen didn't rely on measurements or timers. It ran on memory, rhythm, and generations of knowledge passed through hands instead of cookbooks. "Watch," she'd say, kneading dough for bread on the worn wooden table. I tried to follow her motions, but my first loaves were disasters, underbaked, misshapen, or scorched from the outdoor stone oven. Maria never criticized. She simply broke apart each failure, tasted it with a thoughtful nod, and reminded me, learning is not waste. Her acceptance of imperfection was something I'd never experienced. In my old life, mistakes were to be hidden, explained away, polished over. Here, they were embraced as stepping stones toward mastery. The simplicity of her food was a revelation. Everything we ate came from the land or neighboring farms, vegetables still warm from the sun, eggs gathered that morning, cheese from goats grazing a mile down the road. The flavors didn't need sauces or enhancements, just olive oil, lemon, and a few herbs from Maria's garden. I realized how processed and distant my American diet had been. My body began to shift too. The designer jeans I'd once poured myself into hung loosely on my frame as unneeded weight melted away, replaced by lean muscle from honest labor. My skin, once dependent on expensive creams, glowed from nothing more than olive oil, soap, sun, and sweat. When I caught my reflection in the mirror above the bathroom sink, I hardly recognized the woman staring back, stronger, tanned, and solid in a way I'd never been before. As my Greek vocabulary grew, so did our connection. During evening breaks, Maria would bring out old photo albums. One night, she pointed to a black and white picture of herself as a young girl in the village. I was surprised to learn she had once been a schoolteacher before marrying Theo and returning to her family's olive groves. Then she looked at me and mimicked typing on a keyboard. I pulled out my phone and showed her images from my old interior design portfolio, photos of the career Ethan had always dismissed as just a hobby. Maria studied them with admiration, tapping her temple and saying softly, "Beautiful thinking." Her validation brought tears to my eyes. It was a simple moment, but one I had yearned for without knowing it. Someone seeing my work and believing it mattered. On one rainy afternoon, Maria taught me how to knit. My stitches were uneven and messy, my first scarf lumpy and laughable. But when I wrapped it around my neck, I felt more pride than I ever had wearing the designer cashmere Ethan once gifted me for Christmas. Over time, more handmade possessions followed. a clay mug I shaped under Theo's patient guidance, a woven basket topped by a neighbor with weathered hands. Every item carried a story, a lesson, a laugh. They were nothing I could have bought in a store, and everything I had once been missing. 3 months into living with them, Maria and Theo approached me one morning and led me to the small outbuilding where they pressed and bottled their olive oil. They showed me the modest inventory they had harvested that season: bottles of golden green oil, bars of handmade soap, and jars of preserved olives. Maria pointed to the calendar and smiled. "Market day," she said. "You come." I didn't hesitate. I was ready to show up, not as a guest, not as a refugee of heartbreak, but as someone who belonged. At the village market, Theo and Maria surprised me by placing me front and center at the booth. I hesitated at first, nervous about my broken Greek and their limited English, but they nudged me forward with warm encouragement. To my surprise, laughter flowed more freely than words, and with each clumsy exchange came a small sale: a bottle of our golden green oil, a bar of handmade soap, a jar of preserved olives. As the sun dipped behind the hills and the market began to close, Maria pressed an envelope into my hand. "Your part," she said simply, her tone gentle but firm. I stared at the modest stack of euros inside, probably just enough for a single meal at the overpriced restaurants Ethan and I used to frequent in Boston. But it wasn't the amount that mattered. It was the meaning. This wasn't an allowance or a gift. It was mine, earned through labor, effort, and skill. No strings, no expectations, just fair compensation for honest work. That night I slid the envelope under my pillow, reaching for it more than once, just to make sure it was still real. In our 10-year marriage, Ethan had slowly taken over our finances to simplify things, leaving me with credit cards tied to accounts he monitored. I hadn't held money that was truly mine in years. This envelope, these few crisp bills, felt like the first stone laid on the path back to myself. As I drifted to sleep, it hit me. I hadn't thought of Ethan at all during the market. My mind had been full of Greek phrases for transactions, table arrangements, and a quiet pride in the product we had created together. The space Ethan once occupied in my thoughts was shrinking, replaced by rows of olive trees, warm loaves of bread, and Maria's steady belief that I was capable of more than I'd ever allowed myself to believe. The following week, Maria and Theo invited me to dinner at the village taverna, a first since I'd arrived. Dressed in a borrowed blouse and still a little self-conscious, I walked between them into the bustling place. The owner, Stavros, greeted them with familiar affection, then turned curious eyes to me. "Our American," Maria said proudly in Greek, a phrase I had come to recognize. Stavros smiled warmly and guided us to their regular table. Over grilled fish and homemade wine, Theo cleared his throat. "Rachel," he said in careful English, "we want to talk business with you." My heart raced. Had I done something wrong? Was it time for me to move on? Maria reached across the table and gently took my hand. "We're getting older. 68. 70, she said, pointing between herself and Theo. "No children here. Sophia not coming back." Theo nodded solemnly. "We think retire soon. 2, maybe 3 years. But olive trees," he gestured toward the hills, "they live 200 years. They need young hands." I felt my breath catch in my chest. Maria smiled, her eyes crinkling with kindness. "You learn fast. You work hard. We teach everything." Then, she spread her hands open, offering, "Business yours." I couldn't speak. The idea seemed too big, too generous. "But I don't know enough," I stammered. "The trees, the pressing, the sales, the paperwork. You learn," Theo said simply, firmly. "We teach. No rush." That night marked the start of something new. An apprenticeship not just in olive oil but in legacy. Each morning, Theo led me through the groves, explaining how soil changes the flavor, how to spot signs of illness in the trees, and how timing the harvest correctly can mean the difference between good oil and great. Meanwhile, Maria invited me into the business side. Handwritten ledgers, faded notebooks, and basic spreadsheets their grandson had set up years ago. I saw where I could help. I spent evenings updating their records, creating digital files and sorting sales data. One night I showed Maria how to filter the spreadsheet to see which oils sold best at which markets. She stared in awe as patterns emerged, then looked at me with pure pride. "Smart," she nodded, tapping my temple. Boston brain. Good for business. And in that moment, surrounded by people who saw my value not as a wife or an accessory, but as a capable, contributing woman, I felt something shift. I wasn't rebuilding a life anymore. I was building something entirely new. With Maria and Theo's blessing, I started making small marketing improvements to our little olive oil business. The bottles, once simply hand-labeled, were now adorned with tags I designed myself, each one sharing details about the oil's flavor profile and ideal food pairings, thanks to everything I'd learned from Maria in the kitchen. I created a simple brochure explaining the traditional methods they used, answering the questions tourists often asked at the market. My Greek was getting better too, not perfect but enough to hold a conversation. Slowly, connections began forming outside of our small circle. The village pharmacist who filled Maria's blood pressure prescription started stopping by our booth, not just for olive oil but to chat. Then the baker's wife invited me to her weekly coffee gatherings with other local women. I was terrified at first, but those mornings became invaluable lessons in culture, language, and community. Even Stavros, the taverna owner, became an unexpected ally. He began offering our premium oil on each table, placing our labeled cards alongside. "Good for you, good for me," he said with a wink. Word began to spread. 2 restaurants in nearby villages reached out about stocking our oil. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just participating in something. I was helping it grow. 6 months into this new life, I found myself standing in the back of a small stone church for the baptism of the butcher's granddaughter. I had been invited without hesitation. As the ceremony ended, the village priest approached me, his eyes soft and twinkling. "You bring new life to Old Grove," he said in halting English. "Good for village. Young people leave, go Athens, go America. Village needs new blood." His words clung to me long after the candles burned down. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like an outsider. I felt rooted. From there, the invitations poured in: name day parties, bonfires on the beach, even a seat at a village committee meeting about the summer festival. One friend in particular, Yana the Weaver, became my anchor. She was in her 40s like me, widowed, young, sharp-witted, and brimming with practical wisdom. Our friendship bloomed as we packed up market goods together. We talked business, gossiped about neighbors, and swapped thoughts about life. "You never speak of America," she said one afternoon, her eyes not accusing but curious. "Family there? Friends?" The question pierced me in a way I wasn't expecting. I'd pushed my old life so far into the background that I'd forgotten how isolated it had become. My parents passed away a few years ago. Some friends, but I lost touch, I admitted, trailing off. I remembered how Ethan had slowly made those friendships feel like inconveniences, how he always had a reason why someone wasn't good for us. Or rather, for him. "The husband who left you in Italy," Yana added softly. "You never say his name." "Ethan," I whispered. Felt strange on my tongue. Foreign. Like someone I'd read about, not someone I'd once loved. "His name is Ethan. And no, he never searched for me." Yana didn't offer pity. She raised one eyebrow, challenging. "Maybe time to look. Not for him. For you. Close the door properly." Her words echoed in my mind that night. After dinner, I went up to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and powered on the old phone I had tucked away. I hadn't checked it in months, not out of fear but because I simply didn't want to know. But maybe Yana was right. The Wi-Fi was spotty but enough to connect. My inbox flooded with hundreds of unread emails. I scrolled past ads and junk and then familiar names. Friends I hadn't spoken to in a year. One email, then 2, then several. Their tone changed over time, from casual check-ins to worried questions. I felt a pang of shame. I had vanished from their lives just as thoroughly as I had from Ethan's. But hidden among those messages was something unexpected. A note from my old design mentor. Subject line, opportunity. Then another. Still open if you're interested. I hadn't planned on going back to design. But now I didn't feel like I had to choose between that life and this one. Maybe, just maybe, I could carry both forward on my terms this time. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running. I felt ready. The realization hit me like a wave. I'd vanished not only from Ethan's life, but from my friends too. No explanations, no goodbyes. Just silence. As I scrolled through my inbox, I saw the evidence. Messages from old friends morphing from casual updates to heartfelt concern. Then one thread caught my eye, my former design mentor. Subject line, job opportunity. I opened it. She had recommended me for a remote consulting position with a sustainable materials firm. The last message, dated just 2 weeks earlier, confirmed the role was still open if I was interested. But before I could even process that unexpected bridge to the life I'd once had, another email froze me. The sender, Ethan Davis. Subject: I know where you are. My stomach turned. The message had been sent just hours earlier. Alexis, it's taken months and a private investigator, but I finally tracked you to that backwater in Greece. This has gone on long enough. I'm coming to bring you home and end this ridiculous tantrum. My flight lands in Athens on Thursday. Be ready. The room swayed around me as rage and disbelief collided in my chest. After leaving me abandoned, silent for months, he now wanted to sweep in and collect me like forgotten luggage? I clutched the phone and stumbled down to the kitchen. Maria looked up from the ledger she was reviewing. Her warm smile faded as she saw my face. Bad news from America? She asked softly. Ethan, I managed, barely above a whisper. He's coming. Thursday. Her expression hardened with quiet strength. Without another word, she reached beneath the stack of papers and slid an envelope across the table. Good timing, she said, tapping it. I was waiting for right moment. Inside were legal documents, partnership papers. My name along with Maria and Theo's, written in both Greek and English. I blinked at them, hardly able to comprehend what I held. Not just a job. Not just a home. A third of the business. A real stake in something meaningful. Earned, not gifted. Mine. You choose what happens Thursday, Maria said, firmly pointing to the phone still in my hand. You have home here. Business here. Friends here. That man, he no longer decides. Her words sank into my bones like truth I'd always known but never dared to say aloud. Ethan might be on his way, but he would find a woman entirely transformed from the one he'd so cruelly abandoned. The next 3 days passed in a quiet blur. Not the kind of preparation Ethan expected, but a personal kind of fortification. I met with Katerina, the village's only lawyer, and together we drafted divorce papers in both languages. I replied to my mentor, tentatively accepting the consulting position. I even wrote back to a few old friends offering brief, honest explanations, no apologies, just clarity. Then Thursday came. The sky was impossibly blue. I was in the shed with Theo testing olive oil samples, when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Maria appeared in the doorway, her voice calm but alert. He is here. My heart raced but my hands didn't shake. I wiped them on my apron, smoothed my hair back and walked outside. Ethan stood by a sleek silver rental car, his designer sunglasses perched on his perfect hair. He scanned the modest farmhouse with barely concealed disdain, dressed in a crisp button-down and slacks that cost more than a week of olive oil sales. He hadn't noticed me yet, giving me a moment to see him as he truly was. A man so out of place in the life I now lived, so small against the backdrop of centuries-old olive trees. I stepped forward. Ethan, I said, steady and sure. He turned, startled. His eyes swept over me, from my sun-darkened arms to my scuffed boots, and the disbelief in his expression was almost comical. My God, Alexis, what happened to you? Life happened, I replied simply. What are you doing here? He smiled, that familiar, polished charm sliding into place. I've come to take you home. This has gone on long enough. Don't you think? I shook my head. No, Ethan. This isn't about making a point. It's about making a life. He faltered, confused. And behind me I felt Maria and Theo step out onto the porch. They didn't understand our words, but they understood everything that was happening. Ethan glanced at them, then back at me. Are these the people who've been keeping you here? Alexis, if you're being manipulated. They haven't kept me here, I cut in. They've taught me. About community. About purpose. About trust. I'm a business partner now. This, I gestured around the grove, the house, the life I'd built, isn't a phase. It's a future. His smile dropped. Be serious. You're a designer, not a farmer. Come on, enough of this eat, pray, love fantasy. I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out 2 envelopes. One was the signed partnership agreement. The other the divorce papers. I held them out to him. You left me in Italy, Ethan. You never thought I'd survive without you. But I did more than survive, I built something. Something real. He stared at the papers like they might burn him. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said. But I'd rather risk regret from choices I made than live with the regret of never making them at all. And with that I turned away. Because this time I was choosing me. Ethan stood there, once the towering center of my world, now somehow smaller, dwarfed by the olive groves and time-worn stone farmhouse that had become my home. He scanned me from head to toe, my sun-bronzed arms, the unstyled hair tied back with a faded scarf, my worn boots caked with dust. His lips parted in disbelief. My God, Alexis. What happened to you? The old me would have shrunk under that disapproving tone, scrambling to fix whatever didn't meet his impossible standards. But that woman no longer lived here. Life happened, I said quietly, taking a slow, steady step toward him. What are you doing here, Ethan? He removed his sunglasses, the charm sliding into place like a reflex. I've come to take you home. This has gone on long enough, don't you think? I stopped well outside his reach. This isn't about making a point, I said. This is about making a life. Behind me, I heard the soft shuffle of Maria and Theo emerging from the house. Though they didn't understand our words, they positioned themselves nearby, silent, watchful guardians. Ethan's gaze flicked to them, then back to me, his expression tightening. Are these the people you've been staying with? Have they been holding you here? Because if they've been teaching me, I interrupted, about olive farming, about compassion, about what unconditional kindness looks like. I swept my hand toward the trees, the land that had become mine in more ways than one. I'm part owner now. I have a business here. Disbelief flickered across his face, then gave way to a familiar sneer. A business? Alexis, be serious. You're a designer, not a farmer. What is this, some kind of eat, pray, love phase? He laughed lightly, trying to recover his footing. Look, I admit I shouldn't have left you in Italy. It was a stupid, drunken mistake. I've apologized. Now let's stop this. Come home. I tilted my head. You've apologized? When? Where? Was it in the email where you called this a tantrum? His smile dropped. Fine. I'm sorry I left you in Italy. It was wrong. Is that what you want to hear? Can we move past this now? Why did you even look for me, Ethan? I asked, voice low. It's been months. Why now? He shifted uncomfortably. Your parents have been calling friends. Clients came to the house and you weren't there. It doesn't look good. I nodded slowly. So it's not about me. It's about your image. Our reputation, he snapped. Our life. 10 years, Alexis. A home. Financial security. Respect. What more could you possibly want? I stepped back and gestured behind me, toward the farmhouse and olive trees. Purpose. Connection. The right to choose my own life. I've found all of that here, in this place you dismiss as backward. This isn't you, he said, voice rising with panic. The Alexis I know wouldn't choose manual labor and poverty over comfort and status. A slow smile spread across my face, not bitter, just final. You're right. The Alexis you knew wouldn't. But that woman died the day her husband left her on the side of a road in Italy, laughing with his friends. The woman standing in front of you now, she made different choices. At that moment Maria approached, pressing a folded paper into my hand. The partnership agreement. She couldn't understand our words, but she knew the moment had come. I turned back to Ethan, unfolding the document between us. This is my home. My work. My future. You don't get to collect me like a forgotten suitcase. He reached for the paper then pulled back. You'll regret this, he said, voice low. Maybe, I whispered. But I'd rather regret the choices I made than the life I gave away trying to please someone who never really saw me. And with that, I turned, walking back to the house. Not with rage, not with triumph, but with something far better. Freedom. Earned. And mine. Though Maria couldn't understand our words, she seemed to sense the turning point. I unfolded the document she'd given me and held it out to Ethan. I have legal ties here now. A business partnership. Responsibilities to people who value me for who I am, not for how I look or who I'm married to. His face darkened, frustration rising like a tide. This is ridiculous. Whatever game you're playing. It's not a game, I said, reaching into my pocket. I handed him an envelope, divorce papers already prepared by Katerina, the local attorney. These are official. Filed. They include provisions for the division of our assets. He stared at the envelope like it might ignite in his hands. You can't be serious, he muttered. You'd throw everything away. For this? He gestured toward the modest farmhouse, the groves beyond. I'm not throwing anything away, I replied. I'm choosing something better. Something real. I stepped closer and placed the envelope gently in his stiff hand. You left me, Ethan. You drove off laughing. You just never thought I'd find my way without you. His fingers curled around the papers, his expression flickering shock, disbelief, and then something that looked an awful lot like wounded pride. You'll regret this, he said. But his voice held no conviction. When the novelty wears off and you're still hauling olives in the sun at 60, you'll remember what you gave up. Maybe, I said softly. But I'd rather live with the risk of regret from choices I made than the certainty of regret from choices made for me. At that, Theo stepped forward, placing a weathered hand on my shoulder. He spoke something in Greek, steady, calm. What did he say? Ethan asked, his voice smaller now. He said the road back to Athens is dangerous after dark, I replied. You should leave soon if you want to reach the city before nightfall. Ethan looked at us one final time, realization settling in. This wasn't a plea. It wasn't a negotiation. It was goodbye. Without another word, he turned and walked to his car, the divorce papers still clutched in his hand. I watched as the rental disappeared down the dirt road, dust trailing behind. Maria slipped her hand into mine. Together, the three of us turned back toward the house, my house now too. There was work to be done. Olive oil samples to catalog. Dinner to prepare. Tomorrow's market to plan for. Ethan had once believed leaving me would break me. That I'd come crawling back, grateful for another chance. But instead he planted me in new soil, stronger, richer. And in trying to tear me down, he'd unknowingly given me the greatest gift of all. He'd set me free. Sometimes the most painful betrayals become the very turning points that lead us home, to ourselves. This story isn't just about a woman left behind in a foreign country. It's about every woman who's ever been underestimated, silenced, or made to feel small. When Alexis was abandoned, she didn't fall apart. She rebuilt. She found strength in her hands, purpose in honest work, and healing in unexpected kindness. It's a reminder that we are more resilient than we know. And that starting over doesn't mean failure, it means freedom. If you've ever lost yourself in a relationship, let this story be a spark. You have the right to choose a life that honors your worth. Tell us, what would your fresh start look like? Share this story with a friend who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more empowering journeys of rediscovery and hope.